Welcome back into the Pig Trail Show and welcome into another Hog Hoops Report. That's Kevin McPherson. I'm Jacob Morris. And Kevin, we're talking about a 2-0 week for the Razorbacks. The Hogs take down Pacific on Monday, in-state foe Little Rock on Friday. What were your impressions from the week? Arkansas, as we talked about last week, just kind of continuing to try to find an identity. We know this team is defensive-minded, offensive, starting to find a little bit of answers here.
Well, at 2-0 first, that's the way you want to do a week like that. Two
Yeah.
mid-majors at home. And they were the second and third of a 4-game homestand, all against mid-majors. So you've got to win those games. You got to get those because we know that the SEC is not going to be a win every night out. You got to win these games. And I think fans, and there's probably still more question marks is my biggest takeaway than there are answers right now. There are some things that, like the three-point shooting in some ways has gotten better. You mentioned the defense. That's really kind of where it starts for Arkansas. Top 10 rated according to Ken Palm in defensive efficiency. But here's what's interesting. Arkansas in both games, they were almost like the same script. Yeah. You jump out to a big lead early off those live ball turnovers. It's like they didn't watch any film on Adu Thero, and they, for whatever reason, he gets unleashed out of the gates, and he's gobbling up steals, and he's going the other way. And now he's tattooing the rim. The Bud Walton Arena rims are like, wow, again, come on. We're kind of bashful now. But that's part of it. Arkansas gets on these runs, builds these leads. And then you have Arkansas, other teams make, especially at halftime, start to make adjustments. When in the case with Pacific, they started knocking down threes. With Little Rock, it was a combination of things. But you see zone defenses. That's kryptonite for Arkansas's offense. I go back to that just against Little Rock. The first building up to that 39-17 lead, a lot in transition. They had 10 first half steals out of 15 for the game. Wow. But the offense in the half court in the first half moved the ball really well. The spacing was good. And Arkansas on the it's almost like a receiver that anticipates the ball being there and they start breaking up field and you see them not make the catch. Arkansas did a really good job of not only making the catch, but they were starting to break against the momentum of Little Rock defenders to get into those gaps and get into those driving lanes before Little Rock could trap or give gap help on defense. So even the offensive flow was good in the first half. The zone came, and it's I think Darrell Walker, Little Rock's head coach, former Razorback great, said it was a 2-3 zone. But if you watched it, it morphed. It was a 2-3. Sometimes it was a 1-1-3. It was a 1-3-1. And Arkansas is just baffled. We saw it against Baylor. We saw it at times against Troy. Arkansas thawed out in the second half against Troy and just started shooting over the defense and making threes. And in this game, this wasn't a three-point night for Arkansas. And then you saw a lot of turnovers, unforced turnovers on one end, a lot of steals and good work on defense. And then you're kind of offsetting some of that. Adu Thero, just using him as an example, what a beast he's been. And Arkansas's leading scorer on the season, 23 points against Little Rock, team high 8 rebounds. 6 steals, 5 turnovers. And so you're kind of giving back some of that goodwill you built up on your defense. You're counter punching off your defense, getting easy scores, but then you're giving the ball back. And a lot of that's unforced, just trying to do too much because you're not letting the ball movement do the work. And guys that are good drivers, they're not that good. When a team throws something at you that's taking away those driving lanes, now you need to move it inside out, maybe high post, low, cutting guys from that baseline of the dunker spot. Arkansas doesn't do a good job of working a zone. And so unless you're shooting over it at a high rate, you're going to have an ugly half like Arkansas had against Little Rock in the second half. Against Pacific. Pacific was hanging around Arkansas midway in that second half, down by 5. Yeah, so both games, you had the big 22-point lead at some point. Arkansas actually got to 22 against Pacific at the end, and it ended up being 19 as the final margin. But you build up these big leads, and then they shrink down, and then Arkansas, to their credit, has found ways to go ahead and win by double digits. 12-point win was the narrowest of the team's 4 wins this season against Little Rock. Little Rock is probably a little better than some of these teams coming in with a road win on Wednesday against Tulsa. That's no slouch out of the American Athletic Conference. So to kind of, wrap up some of the issues, without Jonas Adu and even Trevor Brazil out, Arkansas has been soft in the paint in many ways around the basket. Big Z will block some shots in space, but he's not a big rebounder, and he's not really playing or dealing well with physicality. Some of the issues. So you could argue that Arkansas is down to 7 players, and the second halves are getting maybe more tired. and they're not as precise, and you throw wrinkles like zone defenses, and it just kind of compounds it. There are more question marks, Jacob, than there are answers right now. And I think you could say, well, isn't that to be expected 5 games in? In some ways. Then you've got the case of Nelly Davis. He
Yeah.
was out 3 weeks with a wrist injury. He shot well against Pacific, but only took 5 shots. He didn't shoot well against Little Rock and only took 5 shots. So you're thinking, this is the guy that's your preseason all everything. He was meant to be, in theory, the leading scorer competing for that. And to me, some of the other stuff off the ball now and off the scoring part of it, you're seeing really mixed results as of late. Even some of the hustle play, rebounding stuff, some of that's come into question a little bit with him. Again, DJ Wagner maybe starting to thaw out from 3. The only 2 constants and consistents in 5 games have been Adu Thero. We didn't mention Boogie Fland. Both of them over 20 points again.
Yeah.
Fland continually is good in the assist game. Both of them get steals. Outside of those 2, you're really trying to figure out who else is right now playing at a high level. I'd say it's those 2, and you'd rather have 2 than none, but you'd rather have 5 than 2.
Yeah.
5 guys, especially with a veteran group. You're not all freshmen anymore.
Yeah.
And I'll say this, Billy Richmond, let's not leave his name out. He's done some really good things in his minute, the true freshman wing off the bench. He's still learning the game, obviously, but he's been efficient. He plays really, really hard, 90 miles an hour. If I were clocking it, if I had a radar gun on it, I'm saying he and Adu Thero are 90 to 100 at all times. And there's elements of that you need right now. But there's still a lot of question marks. Where is Jonas Adu in terms of a real return and being available? After playing 20 minutes the first 3 games? Nothing. Trevor Brazil missed the last 2 games. Hog fans are used to that by now. And then the only name I left out is Carter Knox, who took his highest volume of shots in this last game. He hasn't been shooting well. He was open a lot. He didn't shoot well. 2 of 11 from the field, 2 of 4 at the foul line. But at least he made a field goal. He hadn't made a field goal since the season opener. So you say you're kind of trading some progress with some other things that you're like, wow, this team's far from where it needs to be. Defense is the calling card right now. But even that, they've had stretches where that hasn't really been there, and it's helped allow some of these teams get back into games.
I think it's such a good point about, you have 2 constants right now. You'd like to see more than 2, right? Especially with John L. Davis. Last week we were saying, man, you didn't bring him here to potentially be your 4th leading scorer, and now we're 7 days later and he's dropped to your 5th leading scorer, right? And he just looks to be a little bit, whether it's the wrist hampering him or anything else, he looks to be a little bit, I don't want to say confused. It's clearly a different role for him, coming from a place where he was a ball dominant guy and a guy that was scoring 18 points a game. He's being asked to float around and play off ball, and they have to find a way to get him going a little bit as well. Carter Knox has just been interesting from the standpoint that it can only really go up from here for him, right? Yeah. When you look at this, I mean, he's 4 of 25 on the season. It's really hard to sugarcoat that. 1 of 15 from 3, and it's not going to be that bad, but they have to find a way to continue to kind of get these guys in a rhythm offensively, and that's the story overall. And last week we looked at the assist to turnover ratio, and it might just be a good idea to just look at that week to week. It was 1 perfectly on the dot last week. And to your point about giving some back on the offensive side, this week it's under 1. Arkansas 66 assists on the year, 71 turnovers. That's 281st out of, I think it's 353 teams in the country, right? And the thing about this is it's a small sample size until it's not, right? So you want to see this continue to improve, because now it's 5 games and the competition level is only going to raise coming up here. And that's a good segue going into this week where it's going to step up massively. You have Maryland East Shore on Monday. It's another, opponent coming in for Arkansas that they should feel good about. But then it's Illinois on Thursday, a team that beat Maryland East Shore by 37, I think, 2 days ago. And Arkansas, it gets real fast. Thanksgiving Day, center stage, national stage with Illinois and Kansas City. It's a game Razorback fans should be excited for, but it's a game Arkansas also needs to take a big step forward with if they're going to compete against the Illini.
Well, they've played 1 high major on the season. That's the 1 loss, and it was a neutral site game. So you've got another one Illinois ranked 25th. That may not last after losing at Alabama this
Yeah.
past week. I mean, they did beat Maryland Eastern Shore. You know, so to me, this Arkansas team, there are still more questions than answers. I'm not sure that we're going to get a whole lot more answers, win or lose. I think it's
Yeah.
going to be a close game. But I don't know that unless we see Jonas Adu ready to give them at least 20 minutes. I mean, if you could give him 15 minutes, that would blow
That'd
away
help.
what he's done already.
Yeah.
Barring something, I mean, we've seen DJ Wagner started the season 0 of 6 from 3. In the last 2 games, he's 5 of 10. We've learned just a little bit, at least, that maybe he's getting maybe more acclimated there. He also had in the last 3 games 2 of his best assist games this year. So since the opening week, maybe he's gotten a little better offensively. So I do feel like maybe there's something there. The team, as a team, they've gotten better shooting from 3. There's been a little progress. I don't want to leave all that on the table and
Yeah.
not mention it. But again, when you're hanging your hat on live ball turnovers, transition, that leaves a lot in your half court game on offense where it's really easy to throw that kryptonite, that some zone defense, if you're decent
Yeah.
at it, and give Arkansas problems. The other thing is the turnovers. You went back to the assist to turnover ratio. If you're going to continue to be high in turnovers, it kind of dissolves that advantage you had by creating them. So we're repeating that only to say I don't know how much of that against Illinois tells us much. We're going to see. And even then, it might be something good might be an outlier, or something bad might be an outlier, or both of them may be trends that just continue for a while. And like you said, we can sit there and say small sample size, but we also have some things that were pretty and ugly in those 2 exhibition games. So really, in a sense,
Yeah.
and those were against 2 high majors where there's not a lot of fool's gold in that necessarily. So you've got 7 games. So you're getting to a point now where some of the problem areas, it's going to take some work to fix those. It's not about they're necessarily outliers at this point. But I do think Arkansas gets to 5-1 against Maryland Eastern Shore on Monday. Then you've taken care of business at that 4-game home stretch, all against mid majors. And now you're trying to prove the next thing. We can beat a quality team at a neutral site, a name everybody recognizes. They don't have to look up where's the Maryland Eastern Shore located. They know Illinois. They know that's the Big Ten, and they know that's a really good basketball program.
Yeah. I'm interested from your perspective. Uh, there's not going to be answers that just pop majorly or just out of the blue, like you're saying against Illinois. But I feel like it's kind of a good idea to come back to this every week. What do you want to see this week to see Arkansas continue to trend in the right direction? Again, it's hard to take a ton from Monday's game against Maryland East Shore, but against another high major opponent like Illinois, what do you want to see from Arkansas to say, hey, things are trending in the right way offensively and just across the board?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'd love to see Adu and Brazil back, or one or the other if I can't have both. So that it starts there. But I think the other thing is, and I've mentioned this before, at what point does Nellie Davis start to feel comfortable and things start making sense? I'm going to say this. I remember Stanley Moody came in with a really highly regarded guy, big production guy, efficient guy, a well-coached player in his mid-major stop before Arkansas. And he really kind of struggled for a while. He didn't have an identity on the team. He wasn't shooting at a high clip. And then Arkansas got into SEC play, and it inverted. It was like he all of a sudden got better. And it was really one of the big keys that's probably underspoken about the success of what that team would do, eventually making Elite Eight. Stanley Moody, a veteran guy, senior guy, a guy that'd been around for a while, got into SEC play, and he was a better player than he was in non-conference when Arkansas, quite frankly, didn't play the toughest schedule. So I think about that, and I think, here's a guy that's a veteran guy. He's been on the biggest stages. He's been to a Final Four. He's produced at a high level. He's an efficient producer, not just a guy taking 30 shots to score 20. I mean, he's efficient. So all these things are playing in my head. I'm like, sometimes it's just not a fit, and sometimes it just takes a while. And I want to see, can 5 games be how long it took? Can 6 and 7 this coming week be the step out maybe for Nellie Davis? I think the other team is Arkansas wants to play with pace, but they've got to figure out how to stop forcing these drives that aren't there when everything else isn't working. And now the defense is on to you. They've kind of synced in. They've settled down. You're not just running and getting layups off steals for every basket you make. sometimes you got to be the play a smarter game. And I think, can Arkansas do a better job and sustain better ball movement and then decision making in the offense? Those are two areas I'd like to see. Individual player, Nelly Davis, maybe hoping maybe there's something happens there. And then you're looking at just on offense, because the defense has been better.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe on offense, you can't necessarily predict how much of your shots are going to go in, but you can get better shots, easier shots by really good ball movement and decision making on offense, and you're going to cut down on your turnovers.
Yeah, all positives. Hopefully Arkansas can start to figure that out. Again, I know we just kind of keep going back to it, but to the point on Nelly Davis, John L. Davis, it just, when you look at his tape from last year and you look at the player that he was, yes, he was at Florida Atlantic, but again, he did this at the highest level against high major opponents, 18 points a game. And again, the number that I keep going back to and what I think we're all waiting on is over 40% on volume from three. You know it's there. It's just a matter of him getting comfortable and figuring it out. And hopefully that's sooner rather than later for Arkansas. Anything else you want to hit before we go, Kevin?
I do want to say this, because fans are going to rumble and they're sometimes impatient. And, Calipari's told us it's going to be, well, don't judge us early. But I think in this age of NIL, it's interesting. They look at these guys, they know they're making money, and they're expecting some kind of return on investment. And then the counter argument is, well, it wasn't your money. But the idea that the fans' money and their attention and what matters to them it really is just secondary. It seems silly to me. There's a lot of money in college athletics. It's why players deserve a piece of it, but a lot of that is the fans. A lot of it's TV, but and so your fan base, I think, when they in this age of NIL, to have any disappointment about performance and things like that, when you throw in that part of it, they see these guys on some levels as professionals. So I think in the past, where criticism you could maybe argue wasn't as warranted, I think NIL opens it up for that. I think it's fair. I think there's some fair criticism there. Not that you're going to start attacking individual players, but at the same time, I think it raises the stakes and expectations should be higher. And I don't think fans should be left on the sideline and talked down to like, well, you don't have a dog in this fight. You didn't put the money in. You're not. No, I think it's fair game. And so I'm just going to say that because I think it raises more questions about what's going on out there in terms of the player's motivation. And I think that's fair. I'm not going to go on and on about it's a problem at Arkansas or anywhere else specifically, but I think it's fair to bring those things into the equation.
I think you're absolutely right. And I think the other thing too is the difference between the professional level and here is, and in a lot of situations, fans are giving money, right? With the NIL and everything else. It's
That's
not,
right.
The Oklahoma City Thunder paying blank player $27 million a year. Why isn't he producing? It is fan funded in some regards. So I think you're absolutely right in terms of being able to have an opinion and maybe it just being a little bit more warranted, at least in terms of frustration. But still early in the season for Arkansas, a big opportunity this week on Thanksgiving against Illinois for the Razorbacks. Should be interesting to see how that one goes. But that's going to do it for this week's Hog Hoops Report. That's Kevin McPherson. I'm Jacob Morris. We'll talk to you next week. More Pig Trail Show coming up after the break.